Hello everybody, my name is Rosemary Hill and I'm going to talk to you about music, fans and gender today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the way in which culture is gendered, and I'm going to talk about how that reflects on the audience and how we think of the audience as gendered, and I'm going to talk to you about the impact on women's fandom. Our case study today is rock music, something which I hope that many of you will be familiar with, at least in theory, if not as fans yourselves. So first of all, I want to talk to you about gender as a cultural division. Now, gender isn't restricted to the way that we think about bodies. Gender has symbolic meaning as well. For example, the kinds of clothes we wear, the kinds of things that we do in the world, the kinds of colours. And this is particularly strong when we think about things like pink and blue in the West, where pink is often associated with girls and blue is often associated with boys. And it's not just colours either. We might also think about the way that culture is divided more broadly. So things like soap operas, for example, are often seen as something which women are more interested in. Now, in the West, we think about these kinds of divisions as having an ancient lineage. So if we go back to the ancient Greeks, we can start to think about their belief that the world is divided into opposites. And in the table on the right here, you can see culture versus nature, reason versus emotion, mind versus body, male versus female, sun versus moon, universal and timeless versus specific and quotidian or everyday. Now, this set of opposites is not different but equal. Rather, there is an embedded hierarchy here. And if you look at that list again, those items which are on the left-hand side, culture, reason, mind, male, these things which are all associated with men mean that men too become associated with being reasonable, logical and cultured, whilst women end up being associated with being unreasonable, too emotional, too tied to bodies and the everyday. So this is a hierarchy, with those things on the left being seen as higher up than the things on the right, higher up and better. But as Genevieve Lloyd writes, these are invented associations. There's no evidence here, but this is a powerful discourse that continues through in Western culture. Now, what does this mean for music? It means that some genres end up being deemed more suitable for girls, whilst other genres are deemed more suitable for boys. And our classic example there is that pop music is seen as more suitable for girls and rock music seen as more suitable for boys. Also, some instruments and roles are deemed more suitable for girls, whilst others are deemed more suitable for boys. So if we think about classical musical instruments, flutes, more feminine for girls, trumpets for boys. And this even extends to the kinds of musical sounds as well, as Susan McClary wrote in her famous book, Feminine Endings. So if we think about the different keys that most popular music is in, we have major keys and we have minor keys. And those major keys are typically associated with men, whilst the minor keys are typically associated with women. And I want to play you an example now, based on a very old legend in England about Robin Hood, who was a man who was meant to steal from the rich to give to the poor. And this is a very famous legend, and there have been a lot of different films and television programs about it. And I want you to hear how the two different characters, Marion and Robin, are associated with these different keys. So let's start with the Lady Marian and the minor key. There's me again, hello. So I hope you can hear this. Now hopefully you'll be able to hear the soft harp there and the gentle minor key. Now I'm hoping that if we go to the Robin Hood one, we won't have to listen to an advert first. Fingers crossed. Synthesizer trumpets there. So I hope you'll have been able to hear there the different strengths of those two pieces of music, so that you can hear the way in which music is associated with things which are feminine, when we've got a minor key, when we've got a harp, or a major key and a trumpet to suggest a man, Robin Hood there. But it's not just the sounds of music. Artists, bands and whole genres end up being gendered. Now, why is this? After all, music has got no body and it doesn't have a sex. So what does that mean? So I want to talk quite specifically about rock music now. In the late 1960s in Britain, Europe and America, rock critics worked really hard to make rock seem acceptable, as Moti Regev writes. They started to claim that rock was art, a new golden age of art, and to talk about this in distinction to low culture or mass culture. And as Andreas Hewson writes, this distinction is always gendered and the mass is always feminised. So mainstream also stands in for mass, as Sarah Thornton writes. Within this claim that rock is art, there has to come as well a rejection of the feminine. So those journalists writing about rock music were really careful to exclude anything that they thought of as feminine that was associated with pop music. And we call this the rock-pop divide. And Norma Coates writes about this. Lucy O'Brien has also written about how women rock musicians have tended to be written out of history, and that in that process we can see how rock critics really are pushing the feminine out of rock to try and maintain its masculine and therefore art status. We should also note here that within this idea of rock music as art, we get a disavowal or a disacknowledgement of the black blues origins of rock as well. So, for example, we don't hear a lot about Led Zeppelin's Theft of Whole Lotta Love, originally by black bluesman Willie Dixon, who you can see at the bottom right of the screen there. The thing is that it's not just the music that we're talking about. It extends to the fans as well. So these music critics, these rock critics who wrote about rock music being art, they're mostly men. And they assume that rock is a male genre. and they assume that their readers are male. So they're writing for a male audience. And they view rock as this transcendental art form, which is universal and timeless. It's outside of social conditions. And if you think back to the table with the ancient Greek binaries, you can see how that universal timelessness sits on the left-hand side and is associated with men and logic and reason. And Holly Cruz argues that these rock critics have treated women fans as if they are unable to understand rock music, as if women are too embedded in the everyday to be able to make sense of these transcendental art form of rock. As part of this process then of gendering rock to maintain its masculinity, to maintain its appearance as something which is a serious art form, women fans are represented as groupies and teeny boppers, which means that they're being sexualized and objectified, treated as if they're more interested in the person of the musician than the music. They're treated as if they're not serious fans and unable to appreciate the music because, as I said, they're too embedded in the everyday, unable to grasp the transcendental nature of the art form. Jonathan Griselia, wrongly, says that women go to concerts to please their male partners. And age is also a factor here, so that teeny boppers tends to be the way that young women are characterised, whilst groupies typically more associated with older women. And teeny boppers is associated often more with pop music, but also with rock music when the fans are younger women. And groupies are thought of as being interested in only having sex with rock musicians. As Sarah Thornton argues, these fans lack the kinds of subcultural capital that are needed to have a good status as rock music fans. But in the end, the most important thing that we have to recognise in this representation is that women are thought not to enjoy rock music at all, as if it is beyond our understanding and beyond our pleasure. Now, I don't need to tell you that that's rubbish. If you don't like rock music, I'm sure you know plenty of women who do. In fact, you're listening to one right now, for example. And enjoying the music is really important to fans. It's not just about the fashion or the clothes, as some people would argue. Now, these kinds of representations present some difficulties for women rock fans. There is a problem when it comes to negotiating this exclusion of femininity and glorification of masculinity that is so important to rock music and its perception as an art form. Sonia Vasson writes that within heavy metal fandom, there are a few identity positions for women to occupy. They can either be the den mother, one of the boys, treated as asexual, or they can be a band whore, somebody who wants to sleep with the band and who isn't interested in the music. Or you might remember that as a groupie. In that case then, how is it possible to be a rock fan and to be feminine enough to be a woman, to think of yourself as a woman, to be seen as a woman, but also to negotiate these difficult ideas that are associated with the exclusion of femininity? There's also the assumption that participation in rock music is the same as being willing to have sex with numerous partners. This leads to a problem where sexual harassment is a widespread problem, as I've found with my co-researchers, David Hesmondhalgh and Molly Megson. And it leads to a question of how is it possible to negotiate this sort of myth that women rock fans are groupies and one's own sexual desire. I mean, what if you actually do want to sleep with the musician, but the myth of the groupie says that that is a bad thing and you shouldn't want to do that? So sexism here is damaging to a sense of self and a self of identity for the fan, for the female fan. In order to deal with this, Sonia Vasson says that women rock fans and metal fans try to ignore the sexism as best they can and just get on with enjoying the music. And in my work, and you can just see the cover of my book there in the bottom right-hand corner, Gender, Metal and the Media. In my work, I talk about the way in which women rock and metal fans have to downplay their sexuality in order to be seen as worthwhile fans or people who really do understand the music. And Sonia Vasson also argues that challenging sexism positions you on the outside of the group, an idea that I've also written about in terms of there's this ideal of equality which is deeply embedded in the ideology of rock music. But that is an equality that is really sort of mythical and only really works if you are in the in-group to start with, i.e. male. And in Britain, that also means white and it also means straight. So if you are equal to the category of rock fan, then the ideology goes, you are acceptable into rock. However, the identity position of rock fan in the first place is one which is sexist and racist in the UK. And therefore this ideal of equality is only really extended to other straight white men. Therefore, if you challenge the sexism of rock music, you are in danger of positioning yourself as not a rock fan. So it is a dangerous position to be in. Now, how else might we think about women's fandom of masculine genres? Now, in my research, I found that through talking to women about the music that they love, the rock music and the metal music that they love, there is much more to loving the music than just taking some sort of masculine pleasure in the angry and loud sounds. We already know that music doesn't have an essential gender. Music is music. If there is gender present, it is because we read the gender onto the music. But women experience anger and they require the catharsis that listening to loud, angry music can bring as well. And in fact, it's pretty sexist to assume that we don't experience anger and that we don't require the kinds of catharsis that rock music can provide for us. Indeed, rock music presents many other pleasures for us, such as that pleasure of transcendence, where transcendence can be taking us out of the everyday. And if our everyday life involves the drudgery of housework, as it did for some of my interviewees when I was writing my book, if your everyday life includes those kinds of drudgeries of housework, then having music to take you beyond that, to provide you with transcendence, is really, really important. And music has these kinds of uses which are beyond just pleasure in listening. So it can be helpful in enabling us to work through difficult feelings, such as having a broken heart. So one of my interviewees said to me that listening to Killswitch Engage, and that's Howard Jones from Killswitch Engage at the bottom right, listening to Killswitch Engage helped her to deal with her broken heart when she got divorced. For other people that I spoke to, listening to music helped them to clean the house, helped them to get on with the gardening, helped them to endure a boring commute. So music has uses beyond just listening pleasure. And actually, it doesn't really matter how old you are. You can have really complex readings of the music that you're listening to, and you can bring various discourses together, and you can empathise with the artists across boundaries of gender, race, and age as well. And Melanie Lowe talks about this in her work on young girls' fandom of Britney Spears. If you're interested in these ideas, then you can listen to the New Books podcast or the Thinking Aloud radio programme, and I've put some links at the bottom of the slide there so that you can listen to those if you wish to in your own time. Now I have some questions for you. When we talk about fans, how often do we consider how gender inflects and impacts on our fandom? For women, the sexism can be very obvious and can lead to the kinds of exclusions that I've talked about. Exclusions of not being treated as a serious fan, being asked a number of questions to prove that you're a serious fan, like, do you know the name of the first singer of the band, for example? For men, they might not ever really think about their gender unless they experience sexism, and that might be quite rare in rock music, since rock music is really being aimed at men. But gender isn't a synonym for women. Men are gendered too, and men should think about how gender works in relation to their rock music fandom and other fandom. It's really important that we ask ourselves, how does gender impact on the way we think about what is good fandom, or even what counts as fandom? So what kinds of hierarchies of fandoms exist? What do you think? So to wrap up, in thinking about our engagements with culture and our fandoms, gender's a crucial axis of theorisation. Culture is gendered, fans are gendered, and culture is gendered along fan lines. This gendered hierarchy within fan groups as well can be very painful, leading to feelings of alienation from other fans. Looking from a feminist perspective highlights the other ways of being a fan that illuminate what it means to engage with culture, ways of thinking about transcendence which are not about thinking about universal issues but about taking us out of ourselves, for example. And this isn't just specific to metal or music fandom, but is broadly applicable as well. So you can start to think about how culture and fandom are gendered and start to ask critical questions about the gendering of the things that we love and the way in which we treat men and women who love those things. Now, I've included some references here should you want to read further. They're on the end of the slide there. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this interesting, and I look forward to meeting you in the future and talking more about these issues. Thank you. Bye-bye.